Let me tell you a story I've told before, but I don't think I've told it for a long, long time, so I think people haven't heard it. When I was a young reporter for a newspaper in a small town, I got a call from a funeral home to take an obit, which was pretty normal, except in this case, the obit was a young man who was 17 years old, and so my editor immediately said, you should check that out and find out how a 17-year-old ended up dead. I did, and it turned out he had hanged himself. I started to write up the story as a small obit, just saying that he had committed suicide, when I got a call from the boy's mother. And she was obviously incredibly distraught, and she begged me not to run the story. She did not want the fact that her son had committed suicide in the newspaper. So that was not a decision I was at a level to make, so I handed it off to my editor, who was one of the nicest women I've ever met and a woman I respected 100%. She was an incredibly good news lady and also just a sweet, gentle person. And I expected her to just say, yeah, of course, we won't run this story. But she did. She wouldn't do that. She said, we are going to run the story. We have to. She was very sweet about it. She was very kind about it. But she said, it's just going to be a little obit, but it does have to include this information. Afterwards, she and I got into a conversation that lasted well into the night, where I objected that I didn't see why in a small town we had to reveal the secret that this lady had. And she said, look, we're a newspaper. Everything that happens is a piece of information that we have to tell because it builds slowly the story of this town and of this county. As it turned out, she, as I found out a couple of years later, was entirely in the right. I never felt good about it, but it turned out that they were having a spate of suicides, and each one of those suicides was part of that story. It was a little dot in the pointless painting that we were making of the story of that county. There was, in fact, a spate of teenage suicides going on, of which this boy was one. So when a story like the one in New Zealand happens, and a guy goes out and he slaughters 50 people at their prayers, and it's obviously very upsetting. He puts out a manifesto. He had a video cam going at the time he did it. There's this impulse on us to push everything under the table, to not spread his name or the manifesto. We think these guys are doing this for fame at some level, and maybe spreading their name makes them want to do it more. I don't have any problem with hiding the guy's name. I don't know if that's a really big point about his name, but the character of the person and the manifesto and the things he does should remain and the things he does should remain public knowledge, because it starts to build a picture of what kind of people commit crimes, what kind of philosophies they hold, and what it is that inspires them to do the things they do. And I don't think that the possibility that someone will be deterred from doing this by us hiding his manifesto is worth not knowing what this is, because if ever we're going to get to a place where we can deal with these sorts of things and maybe lessen the number of attacks, it's going to be because of what we know, not because of what we don't know. And so, I was really, I know that people were incredibly upset because he put this video of the killings up there, and people wanted to take it down. But I objected to the fact that the Prime Minister of New Zealand told Google, Instagram, and Facebook that the videos had to be removed, or she would bring the law against them. I think that's wrong. I think there's a reason we have free speech. And even though these things are incredibly damaging and upsetting, and even though some sicko might use them as a form of murder porn, I think they should remain available to those people who want to look at them and study them and find out about them. However, having said all that, the information like this is sensitive information. It's hard information to understand. It's only a point in the pointillist picture that we're drawing of why people do this stuff, and it has to be handled properly. When guys put out these manifestos, the instantaneous rush to claim that somehow they have condemned your political opponent is awful. It's disgusting. It's degrading to the person doing it, and it's degrading to the victims. It's using the bodies of the victims as your soapbox to make a political point. Now, when people do it on Twitter, that's one thing, because people on Twitter are what they are. Everybody's on Twitter, so you're going to get bad folks on Twitter as well as good folks. When the news media does it, it truly, truly is horrible. It truly is horrible, and that is what they are doing. I read this manifesto. Look, if an idea is bad, one person adopting that idea, a sick person killing people in the name of that idea, is not the proof that that idea is bad. People have murdered each other over love. Is love bad? No. It's obviously the sickness or the passion or whatever was going on at that moment that causes this to happen. Because people murder in the name of a political idea does not necessarily speak against that political idea. The fact that communism murdered 100 million people. That does. Then you have enough information. This is just one piece of point on a graph. It's when you have the whole graph that you have the information. The idea that you can seize on anything these guys say as proof that somehow, because of the guy who shot the Republicans on the softball field because he was a Bernie bro, does that make Bernie Sanders inherently a dangerous guy? No, I don't think it does. I have all kinds of arguments against his philosophy, but one is not that somebody was a lunatic and did this, nor does what this guy say necessarily condemn anything that he was trying to represent. I read his manifesto, The Great Replacement it was called, because he is objecting to the fact that immigrants of color, and it wasn't necessarily Islam, he didn't sound too friendly to Jews or anybody else. He said he believed in white people, and he defined white people as people of European descent, and that people of color were moving in. He was from Australia, I believe, but he went to New Zealand to carry out this crime, and they were moving in to the white people's territory. The thing that struck me about these manifestos, usually I can't read the manifestos because sick people are boring. They're repetitive, you know. They don't have anything new to say. They're lunatics. They're not seeing reality properly, but so that it's not really enlightening when they talk about what they believe. But this guy was a little bit different. This guy had a sense of humor, and he was very, very clearly internet savvy in a very big way. So the thing that struck me about this is that he put this thing out in the form of an interview. So he said that he wasn't committing these murders to become famous, but the fact that he put it out in the form of an interview showed that in his mind he was speaking to the public. His manifesto was in the form of an interview, so he was obviously having this daydream about explaining himself to the greater public. And the reason I say he was internet savvy is there was a lot of internet trickery. You know how there's a lot of trolling and secret info and all this stuff. He did something I can't really say on the air what it's called, but it's where you put up a lot of information that's supposed to throw people off. You know, it's supposed to confuse people. He said repeatedly, and this part of it I actually believe, I think he was right, that he was trying to start hostilities between left and right. He wanted there to be hostilities, kind of like Charles Manson did. Charles Manson wanted to start a race war. I think this guy wanted to start some kind of race war too, because he was hoping that whites would rise up against people of color. But, you know, he had this thing where he said something like, the person who has influenced me above all was Candace Owens. Each time she spoke, I was stunned by her insights, and her own views helped push me further, though I will have to disavow some of her beliefs. The extreme action she calls for are too much, even for my taste. Obviously, the guy is trolling, not Candace. He's trolling the left-wing media. He wants the left-wing media to go after Candace, which some of them did, because he knows how stupid they are, and he knows they'll jump on anything. One question later, he says Spyro the Dragon 3, this kid's video game, Spyro the Dragon 3 taught me ethno-nationalism. So in other words, he's just throwing stuff out there, hoping to confuse people and hoping to cause hostilities because he knows how bad the press is. He had this thing where he says, I graduated top of my class in the Navy SEALs and I have over 300 confirmed kills. And they call this on the internet something like copy pasta, Navy SEAL copy pasta, where you pretend how tough you are and you try and be you're trying to show yourself to be an important, tough guy. So he was doing all this internet stuff, which speaks to me of the fact that he's on the internet, that he's talking to people who agree with him, that he's stuck in this kind of place where you get in on the internet, or if you work for the mainstream media and you're only talking to people you agree with, and you're not seeing the people you disagree with. They're an abstract, they're an illusion. It doesn't matter if you say mean things about them. I see this on the right a little bit. They theorize about how certain people should be left out of society, or how certain people should be rejected, because they don't know the people that they're talking about. And when they see them face to face, they think, well, maybe I should modify that statement. But this guy obviously was well and truly planted in the internet only with his own people. And ultimately, the guy is a fascist. I think that was the one thing we can say. He was an ethno-fascist. He believed in fascism and in maintaining the whiteness of the West. One of the things he did was he put up this thing. The question he has is, were or are you a supporter of Donald Trump? And he says, as a symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose, sure. As a policymaker and leader, dear God, no. So in other words, he doesn't like the policies of Donald Trump, but he liked the image of Donald Trump as a symbol of renewed white identity. And the media and the Democrats, but I repeat myself, jumped after this and just went after Trump as if this had something to do with him, which I just found. I mean, this is the President of the United States that you're blaming for a lunatic shooting people in New Zealand. I mean, that is truly disgusting. Here is a montage we put together. What's his name? Jim, look at me. I'm Jim Acosta, Max Boot, and Kirsten Powers pulling this, making this connection.
Language in this manifesto that was describing the president as sort of a hero to people who identify with their white heritage. And what was also striking, Anderson, in that manifesto was that the killer was using terms like invaders and invasion when talking about immigration and the immigration issue, almost the same kind of language that the president was using earlier today when he was vetoing that legislation up on Capitol Hill, rebuking his use of a national emergency declaration to build his wall on the border.
I mean, this is a president, Anderson, who has built his entire political career on racism and anti-Islamic bigotry. I mean, remember, he rose as a political candidate with this crazy birtherism theory about Barack Obama, but he also did it by calling for a complete and total shutdown of all Muslims coming into the United States. He said that Islam hates us. He has done and said a lot of things that are very congruent with the kind of ideology that these white supremacists actually have, which is not to say that it's exactly the same thing, but I think there is enough overlap there that they take inspiration from his words.
I don't think you can blame Donald Trump for this attack. I think you can blame Donald Trump for really trafficking in bigotry and, Islamophobia, wanting to ban all Muslims, as he said during the campaign. However Donald Trump identifies himself, all we know for sure is that the white supremacists see him as an ally.
So I don't know if you remember in Game of Thrones, somebody says everything that comes before the word "but" is horse manure. So when they say I can't blame President Trump for this attack, but that means you're blaming President Trump for this attack. And the thing that Trump does that really drives them crazy is that he will not subscribe to their narrative. He's done it again and again. They said to him, is white supremacy, in your view, a rising problem? And he said, not really. Here's his response.
I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems. I guess if you look at what happened in New Zealand, perhaps that's a case. I don't know enough about it yet. They're just learning about the person and the people involved. But it's certainly a terrible thing, terrible thing.
So here are two clips of Democrats responding to this. One is Senator Richard Blumenthal. The other is Tim Kaine, almost Vice President of the United States. Both of these I just find appalling. But this is their response. It's very important to the left that we see the white supremacists who are in some sense rising, where there is a real clash of cultures going on in Europe, and there is white supremacy rising. But in this country, I don't know. I have yet to see a real rally of these guys that made a lot of noise, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Let's just first look what the Democrats responded. Play Richard Blumenthal first.
A heartbreaking day, and of course our prayers go out to the people of New Zealand, particularly the loved ones and survivors and victims. But words do have consequences, and we know that at the very pinnacle of power in our own country, people are talking about good people on both sides.
You mean the president? They're having a hard time calling this out for some reason.
I think it's more than the president. It's the people who enable him and who fail to stand up to him and speak out. And we're seeing some glimmers of spine now in the United States Congress. Some of my colleagues in the last 3 votes standing up to him and saying no to his trampling on the Constitution. But it is also more than words. The president has defied constitutional norms and principles in declaring a national emergency. Words have consequences, like saying we have an invasion at our border.
Words have consequences. So why don't his words have consequences? How did Trump, I mean, this is a thing that hasn't even been tested in the courts yet. How did Trump, by declaring an emergency according to a law that Congress made, how is he going against congressional norms and by waiting for the courts to decide how that's going to pan out? Here's Tim Kaine talking about this as well. And listen to, of course, the repeated theme.
It is on the rise, and the president should call it out, but sadly, he's not doing that. We saw in the aftermath of the horrible attack in Charlottesville that he tried to say that the white supremacists, neo-Nazis, neo-Confederates there were just, good people. But when you see church shootings in Charleston, a synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, you see this hate-filled manifesto of the shooter in New Zealand who is murdering Muslims. We have to confront the fact that there is a rise in white supremacy, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim attitudes. The president uses language often that's very similar to the language used by these bigots and racists. And if he's not going to call it out, then other leaders have to do more to call it out, and I certainly will.
So both of these guys reference what the press has worked overtime at making a mythology about Trump saying that both sides had good people, meaning there were good people among the fascists who invaded Charlottesville. Let's remember what this was about, Charlottesville. There was a local argument about whether a park should be named after Robert E. Lee and a statue of Robert E. Lee should be taken down. It was a local argument. That's a perfectly fair argument. You're a black guy who pays taxes and you don't want to take your kid to Robert E. Lee Park. You have a side in that. You're a man who's proud of his Southern heritage and thinks Robert E. Lee should still be remembered. You have a side. That's a local debate. These fascists, white supremacists descended on the town, and these fascist Antifa people who call themselves anti-fascists but descended on the town with clubs ready to start violence. They came together and there was a clash and a woman was killed by one of the white supremacists. Trump was asked about this, and he was talking about the clash over the statues. And this is what he said as they were shouting him down. The press was shouting him down because heaven forfend that the president should be heard above the voices of Jim Acosta. Trump said, excuse me, they didn't put themselves down as neo-Nazis, and you had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name. And later he said, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists. This is Trump's voice. I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly, but not as unfairly as they've treated Donald Trump. You can hear what he's saying. It's clear what he's saying. If anybody had any problem with it, understanding it, they could have asked him to clarify it. They never did. I've never seen a person say by the two sides, which did you mean? In which point he could have said, as I said at the time, and the two people arguing over Robert E. Lee. So let me ask you this. If this shooter did not approve of the policies of Donald Trump, but he approved of him as a symbol of white supremacy. And if the press has manufactured that symbol, if they have gone out of their way to depict him as that symbol, who's to blame? Who the hell is to blame if this is what this guy saw, because they have worked and worked and worked to make it seem like it's so, when it obviously, just from reading the transcript, is not.